Hello students, good morning to the lecture today of network security. In the network security, we will be understanding the last unit of your subject, and in the last unit we have a topic firewall design principles. So we'll talk about the firewall, its designing, its types, and all the principles that are behind the firewall, the working of the firewall. So let's talk about the firewall. What we mean by a firewall. Firewall basically is a software that lets your system to be separated from the outer network. Basically, what we have internet, and everybody is connected with the internet. So we need to separate our intra network with the internet and our system with the internet. Excuse me. So that purpose we use firewalls. So basically firewalls are the softwares that can be installed in your system. It can be implemented as hardware also. So let's talk about the firewall. Let's go through the definition of a firewall. A firewall is defined as software or hardware that allows only those external users with specific characters to access a protected network. So you have already a network and you want to protect your network, you want to isolate your network from the internet. So what you can do is you can implement the firewall, which will allow you the protection based on some characteristics that you specify to filter the packets on the network. So your firewall will check the rule and identify whether you wish to allow some data on the from the internet to enter in your system or not. So now let's go through with the characteristics of the firewall. So there are three major characteristics of the firewall. One, all traffic from inside to outside and vice versa must pass through the firewall. So if you have a firewall in your system, then any data that is coming from outer network must pass through your firewall, and vice versa also, any data which is going out from your system onto any other network must also pass through the firewall. The second characteristics that only authorized traffic denoted by the local securities will be allowed to pass through the firewall. So once you have a security policy that will tell your system which packets to allow to pass through your system, only those packets will be allowed to pass through the firewall. Either they are incoming or they are outgoing packets. The third characteristics is that the firewall is itself is immune to penetration. That implies the use of secure operating system, keep patching the system regularly, and secure administrative access. Firewall is nothing just like any other software, and it can be affected by the viruses and other harmful things onto the system. So it is basically immune to penetration, and the operating system must apply all the necessary patching, all the necessary security to prevent your firewall from getting harmed, and it must take regular interval checks that the firewall is working fine, your operating system. So these were the three characteristics of the firewall. Now let's talk about the firewall techniques. So how firewall operates, or how firewall helps in filtering the data. So there are basically four types of controlling that firewall can perform. One is the service control, the direct control, the user control, and the behavior control. So let's talk about service control. This type of firewall determines the internet service type that can be accessed. So the firewall identify the type of service that can be accessed by the system or by somewhere on the network, and according to that it filters. It filters the access of the users. The next is direct control that determines the direction. Sorry, this is the direction. So determine the direction in which particular services request may be initiated and allowed to go through the firewall. Whether the data is to be an incoming data or it is an outgoing data. That is the direction of the data flow determined by the firewall. The next is the user control that controls access to a service according to which user is attempting to access it. That is again an authorization and authentication concept, which service to be allowed to which user. This is controlled by the firewall. And the last one is behavior control. That control how a particular service are used, the behavior in which way the services are used. For example, it may enable external access to only a portion of the information or to a on a local server. So that means ki how the external network or external people or external data is using the services, that is called as the behavior control. So these were all the characteristics of the firewall. Now let's go through and understand the working of the firewall. Basically, firewall has two options: to accept the packet or to reject a packet. Rejection includes two things: whether to deny a packet or to drop a packet. While you deny a packet, it will return back to the path, and once you drop the packet, it will not return back to the path, but obviously it will not be accepted by the system. So firewall determines what packet should be accepted, denied, or dropped based on the policy. Now the question arises, what we mean by the policy. Policy basically are the rules that are defined in the firewall, which helps the firewall to decide that the packet is to be accepted, denied, or dropped. Now most firewalls only accept a drop state and will not deny, because denying a packet will result in returning the packet back onto the network, and that will increase the network traffic. So most firewall only accept or drop a packet. So the firewall excuse me, the rules that are defined into the firewall, that are defined by a person, and that person is known as a firewall administrator. So the administrator, the work of the administrator is to define the rules and have a continuous check onto the firewall. uh, the firewalls have default settings of rejecting all the packets. And once you define a policy, once you define a rule, and according to the rule, you set a number of packets to be accepted. And once the rule is defined, then those packets will be accepted, and still the all other packets are rejected. So this is the default policy of the firewall, that by default it rejects all the packets. And once you start defining your rules, that which packets are to be accepted, which services are to be accepted, those are excluded from the default denying list. So this is how the firewall operates. Now let's talk about the type of filtering that a firewall can provide. That is packet filtering, proxy services, and stateful inspection. So these are the three ways in which a firewall works. It has to decide whether it has to filter a packet based on the packet information, based on the service, proxy service information, or based on the state information. So let's talk about packet filtering. It is the most common form of the firewall, which deals with the filtering the packets. It uses a flag for a packet. If a flag is set for a packet, it will obviously reject it. Otherwise, the packet will be accepted. So it all depends on the service of the packet, the type of the packet. The next working criteria is proxy services. A firewall proxy server is an application that acts as an intermediator between the system and the information from the internet. So it creates a proxy server, a mid server in between your system and the internet. To that server, the information from the internet is retrieved and sent to that server. Now that information is examined, and based on that information, the proxy server will decide whether to let the packet or data pass through the system or not. So this is the proxy service. You can pause the video and read the text and can understand. You can have any query, you can comment me and ask me your queries. The third criteria is the stateful inspection, where the state of the packets is identified, it's checked. Now, what we mean by a state? So, a stateful firewall holds significant attributes for each connection in the database. What are those attributes? These attributes can be IP address, can be ports, can be connections, and collectively all the information is known as the state. And this state is stored in a database, and based on this state, the firewall decides whether to allow the packets, whether to allow the data or into the system or not. So that is called as stateful inspection. Types of firewalls. Let's see what are the types of the firewalls. We have a packet filtering firewall, we have the application level firewall, we have screen host firewalls, and we have stateful inspection firewalls, and the fifth one is circuit